Wait for all the. All right. Hi, everyone. Good evening. We're just waiting for everyone to get into the virtual room before we get started. Grab a drink, a sprinkles cupcake, and we'll settle in for the evening. Get started, and I have a couple things to cover, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started because I want to get to the main event. So good evening, and thank you so much for joining the Hudson Library and Historical Society's live virtual event with author Candace Nelson. We are honored to have Candace as the keynote speaker for Hudson's 9th celebration of Global Entrepreneurship Week. It's actually next week, but we're celebrating early. Sponsored by the Burton D. Morgan Foundation. Candace's book, Sweet Success: How to Turn Your Passion into Profits, is this year's community read. Our entrepreneurship series continues next week with the library's 10th annual pitch night and Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Gary Rivlin, author of Saving Main Street: Small Business in the Time of COVID. You can register and view a list of all of our upcoming programs at hudsonlibrary.org. Just a reminder, Candace's book is available for purchase from Hudson's independent bookstore, The Learned Owl. We will put a link in the chat for purchase information. We will also be giving away a few copies of Sweet Success to several lucky attendees tonight. We'll put details about that giveaway in the chat box. As always, questions for the author are welcome and encouraged. Just type your question in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Okay, on to the main event. It's my privilege to introduce tonight's guest speaker. Candace Nelson is a serial entrepreneur, New York Times bestselling author, Wall Street Journal contributor, and an expert in turning one's passion into a profitable business. Candace revolutionized the baking industry when she left a career in finance to start Sprinkles, the world's first cupcake bakery, and Cupcake ATM. Nelson followed with the launch of Pizzana, a growing chain of award-winning pizzerias, leading the third wave of pizza in the US. She continues to expand her portfolio of investments with CN2 Ventures. If I said all that right. Tonight, Candace will be in conversation with Barbara Giordano, seasoned writer and speaker coach. During Barbara's 15-year career, she advised entrepreneurs, executives, Olympians, and scientists on making their stories more accessible and captivating. She's also the 3-time winner of the prestigious Cicero International Speechwriting Awards. And after all of that, Barbara and Candace, please take it away.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you. What an honor to be here. Hi, Barbara.
Right? Oh my gosh. I feel very lucky to have this conversation with you and to be here at the Hudson Library.
What an incredible program.
Right? Completely. And, I have been fascinated with entrepreneurship. You and I are fast friends. And the minute we met, it was like, oh my gosh, as a writer, I have learned so much from your people. So tonight, I'm looking forward to asking you a lot of questions. And the first one I want to just jump in and ask, we're just jump right in, is, how does a woman go who's in finance? How does she go from finance or business to baking? What inspired you?
Yes. So from banking to baking isn't the typical story, but it was mine. I grew up in a very risk-averse household. My dad was a corporate lawyer, and there wasn't really any entrepreneurship in terms of, in my direct family that I looked to as a model. But we really believed in education in my family. And so I went to a great boarding school and a very well-known college. And then I was recruited into investment banking. And I was following this path where, I thought if I did everything right, I, went to the right school and I got the right job and I kept marching up this corporate ladder, that everything would sort of unfold and success would follow. But then life threw me a couple of curveballs. The first was, after working in technology for a little bit, it was the height of the dot-com boom, the bottom fell out from the market. It was the dot-com bust. And the girl who'd done everything right was now on the couch without a job. And then a few months later, 9/11 happened. I actually happened to be on my honeymoon with my husband. We had just had the most blissful 2 weeks in the south of France, eating our way through that country. And we were in the airport on the way home and started to notice this commotion on the TV screens. And the plane started getting grounded. And it was just all of that sort of newlywed bliss for me dissipated. And this dark shadow kind of fell over me. Such a tragic and traumatic time. And for me, it really led to the first time ever thinking about what it is I wanted to do with my life. And if everything was so fleeting, which, 9/11 sort of crystallized for me that it was, and nothing is guaranteed or secure as I had thought it was, what did I want to spend my days doing? And I came to the realization that it wasn't crunching numbers. I wanted to do something that brought me joy. And I looked back to my time as a child and how much I loved baking. I baked with my mom. We grew up overseas, and that was my connection to home. And so I leaned into that. And instead of going to business school, I decided to go to pastry school.
That's quite a departure. I love that. And so you went to how long was the pastry school? How long did it take? And then did you have any epiphanies after pastry school? Like what happened?
Oh, yeah. So I knew that I had always loved to bake. As I said, I grew up overseas. And so baking was my connection to home. When I was homesick for the treats I loved from America, I'd get in the kitchen with my mom. We'd bake from her, very well-worn copy of The Joy of Cooking, all the treats I loved: Rice Krispie treats, brownies, sheet cakes, and cupcakes, all those delicious American treats. But what I didn't know is if I would want to do it every single day as a career. And so pastry school for me was a test. It was that initial test of, okay, I know I love to bake on the weekends, but what does this really look like when I have to get up at the crack of dawn and I have to put on my chef whites? And the epiphany that I had was, I really loved it. I really loved getting up every day, getting inside that sweet kitchen, smelling bread baking, smelling coffee brewing, and creating something tangible, something with my hands that I could then give to someone and watch them enjoy. It was so different from what I'd been doing. And I just found it so rewarding.
That's beautiful. I love that. So at what point did you figure out that there was a market for cupcakes? I mean, or did you figure it out? I mean, like at what point? But
initially, I just started baking out of my kitchen, and I was baking special occasion cakes. So I was making these big multi-tiered, multi-layered creations. And what I realized was people don't order those cakes very often in this country. They're really reserved for the special occasion. And I wanted to make something that people could enjoy every day. Now, when I had been planning my wedding not long before, I had noticed that there was a new trend on the wedding scene. It was the fancy cupcake tower. And it was sort of, I was noticing this trend in Martha Stewart weddings. As I was going around town and tasting wedding cakes, it was an option that I could opt into. I ultimately opted for the wedding cake and not the cupcake tower, but it kind of wormed its way into the back of my brain. And then I remember one day walking through the supermarket and walking past the bakery and seeing these stacks of plastic clamshells. And in those plastic clamshells were these shelf-stable cupcakes. And they were just those sort of, really generic kid lunchbox quality cupcakes decorated with plastic cupcake picks. And I thought, God, those cupcakes are kind of sad. And here's this beautiful, nostalgic American treat that everyone loves. We grew up with them. We have such warm feelings about cupcakes, but there wasn't much to love about them anymore. And I thought, the cupcakes sure could use a makeover. So I set about to reinvent the cupcake, and I took all of the ingredients and the technique and the care that I was reserving for these special occasion cakes, and I just channeled it into these cupcakes.
I love that. I love that. And wow. So what gave you the confidence to open your first store? And like, what was the timeline from when you began? Because you began in baking from home, right? The cupcakes. Give us a little idea of what that was like, baking from home and then growing the business to where you opened your first store.
So once I started baking these cupcakes from home, I thought, I'm really onto something here. I loved that a cupcake was this uniquely American treat. I loved so much about it. It's portable, it's personalized. There was so much to love. And I thought, if I can make this cupcake elevated, artisanal, something that could be sort of on the level of a beautiful gift, giftable, then I think I could increase the market for the cupcake. It wouldn't just be a kid's treat anymore. So, but I knew if I was going to devote my life to cupcakes and open the first ever cupcakes only bakery, the product had to be exceptional. And while I was kind of churning these cupcakes out in my kitchen, and it took about 2 years to get all the cupcakes just right, my husband, who at the time had been working in finance and consulting, said, I think you're onto something. And if you can nail the product, I will join you in this crazy venture, which was exactly to use a ridiculous term, the wind beneath my wings that I needed. Because as I said, I did not grow up in a household of entrepreneurs. I had never imagined myself starting a business. And quite frankly, I didn't have the model or the mentorship to even see myself in that role. So to have someone who was so dear to me say, I believe in you, let's do this together, was really everything to me.
That's huge. That's really huge. Well, and especially in a time, so let the audience know where you where you began your cupcake business and what that market was like, what people might say to you about that market.
So after pastry school, I was in San Francisco for pastry school. And then when Charles and I decided we were going all in on this cupcake idea, we decided to move down to Los Angeles because the market was still really suffering from that technology, the dot-com bust. We moved down to Los Angeles. And of course, people in LA are not really well known for eating a lot of carbs to begin with, right? LA much more known for yoga and green juice. And on top of that, this was 2003. It was the height of the low carb craze. I mean, everyone was eating burgers without the bun. They were eating eggs and bacon for breakfast. And they said to me, you're doing what? You're opening a cupcake bakery? Nobody eats carbs in this town. Nobody eats carbs in America right now. And I thought, that's really discouraging. But at the same time, I didn't believe it because I was one of those people who would eat the burger without the bun, but I would still have a dessert if it was craveable and splurge worthy. And I knew my cupcakes were. And I first was just showing up at every party with boxes of cupcakes in hand. And my friends would be like, this is not a birthday party. Why are you showing up with cupcakes? And I thought, it doesn't matter. Have some, taste some. And had some humiliating moments in the process, right? Stood at trunk shows with business cards, nobody talking to me. But before long, I started getting calls. Friends of friends would call me. And then not long after that, I started getting calls from people and I could not trace how they had found me. And that's when I knew I was onto something.
That's fantastic. And so your first store, what was the location like? And why did you choose that particular location?
Our very first store was in the heart of Beverly Hills, not too far away from Rodeo Drive. Now, that makes it sound like we had investors and gobs of money to throw at this, enterprise. Nothing could be further from the truth. My husband and I pooled our resources from the few years we'd had in the career world. We bootstrapped this business. There is not an investor on this planet who would have backed us. It was such a crazy idea. Everyone said it would never work. But because we were reinventing the cupcake and elevating it and making it aspirational, that 90210 zip code was really important. It really set the stage for the fact that this was going to be not like your typical cupcake. This was going to be something different, something elegant, and something beautiful. And so the experience had to speak to that as well.
Gorgeous. And it did.
And it did. I mean, I was speaking to someone the other day who said he remembered waiting in line in the early days because his wife wanted to visit Sprinkles, but he didn't realize they were at a cupcake bakery because he thought it was a boutique, a fashion boutique, or a jewelry store. And that's exactly what I had in mind when I was designing the store, was that when you walked in, you knew that something different was going on here. And something had to be, we had to set the stage for that, because at the time, people were still used to buying cupcakes at Ralph's grocery store for 75 cents. And here I was using the world's best chocolate, the world's best vanilla, baking everything from scratch all day long and charging $3.
Which was a fortune at the time, right?
Fortune. Nobody could believe it.
Yeah. So what were some of the hurdles that you had to jump opening your store? Like what was unexpected? Because it seems that, you had a very steady rise, like a kind of a meteoric rise, but I would imagine there were hurdles and things that were unexpected in the early days. Can you share a few of those?
Absolutely. There are so many hurdles, and it's true. We tend to focus on the success story at the end, but it's so important to shine a light on all of the missteps and the challenges in the beginning. First and foremost was the fact that no one believed in my idea, and everyone thought I was a little bit nuts. I had been on this very traditional, lucrative path, and I had to get past the idea that I had to get over the fact that people didn't agree with what I was doing. I had to sort of let go of the idea that I cared what other people thought. And as much as I loved hearing from my friends and family as to their thoughts on my venture, ultimately it came down to myself, me betting on me and going with my gut. So it really, those early challenges had a lot to do with just my mental game, right? Everybody telling me it wouldn't work, looking for that first location and having landlords not call me back. I had one landlord hang up on me. He thought the idea was ridiculous. We had no track record. We'd never worked in a bakery before. I mean, in retrospect, it was a little ridiculous, but I had such a passion and I had such a fire because I believed in my idea so much that I just couldn't stop. And it also happened to be a very tight real estate market. So it took forever to find a location. And while we were looking for this location, driving from Pasadena to Venice and all over LA County, money was starting to run out. And my car was breaking down and I needed a filling. And there's a story in the book I share where the doctor said, "No, I'm going to give you this porcelain filling." And I said, "No, it's too expensive. The silver filling will do." And sacrifices like this that I look back on now and it's a badge of honor. But at the time, I didn't know when we were going to find our location. I didn't know if we were going to have enough money to see our dream through. So that's when you dig into those entrepreneurial qualities like perseverance.
Without a doubt, right? You really find out what you're made of in those moments of like, okay, what matters to me? If I really want this, how badly do I want it?
Exactly.
That's beautiful. And so those first few days and weeks that you were open with the store, like what were some of the things that happened that you just did not expect?
Well, given that everyone said no one would show up, I was not expecting a line out the door on day one. And it was an early lesson in the power of email marketing, because on day one, I don't know if anyone out there remembers, there was an email marketing newsletter called Daily Candy, and it reported on what was hot and happening each day. And it really had a devoted following. So we were the feature in Daily Candy that day. And I looked outside. I remember being minutes away from opening and there was a line out the door and I couldn't believe it. But the problem was I had baked, what I thought would be plenty to get us through the day. I had my cupcake case all, stocked with beautiful cupcakes. It was pristine. I was ready to go. Everyone was going to come and buy one or two cupcakes and, have a delicious snack. Oh no, these people had driven across town. They'd found parking in Beverly Hills and they were not leaving unless they had one or two dozen. So within 3 hours of opening, our cupcake case was completely bare, and our very happy line of customers who were so eager to try our cupcakes had turned into an angry mob. And it was like that for weeks. I could not get my production under control. I was working out of like domestic size mixers, little KitchenAid mixers that you would have in your kitchen. My recipes yielded 2 dozen, and each person was coming in and buying 2 dozen. So I spent the first few months apologizing to customers. My dream of having customers show up my door had become a nightmare. I remember one woman coming in and yelling at us. She was so mad, and rightfully so. She said, "You're incompetent. You'll never make it." And I think people gave us a second chance. It was a miracle that they did. But people gave us a second chance because they just saw us working as hard as we could. And I just was up in the front and apologizing profusely. And so, genuinely, they could see that I really cared. And I was trying as hard as I could to get cupcakes in the case and send them home with their dozen cupcakes. And they luckily gave us a second chance.
It's fantastic. And you got the industrial size equipment then after that.
Yes.
It's a whole other learning curve, right?
Yes. And even though my car was conking out and falling apart and I desperately needed a new car, we needed a new mixer more. So the day that I got my big stand mixer was probably the happiest day of my life. Minus my, birth of my children and my wedding day, because it just relief, but it was the cost of a small car. Let me tell you that. So, we took the Saab, the old hatchback Saab, back to to get fixed up again and carried on.
I love that. I love that. Well, that's those early days, right? They're just like 24/7 that you just have to keep going and really persevere. But that's where everything happens. That's where the magic happens if you can hang with it,
Yes. What was really funny, Barbara, is that the scarcity ended up sort of fueling a demand, because in Hollywood in particular, in LA, there is a little bit of a sense of FOMO, right? Like, what do you mean you can't get your hands on that $3 cupcake? And then all of a sudden everybody wanted it. And I've actually been accused later on of actually not making enough for just that reason. And I say, I wish I had been that strategic. No, I simply didn't know what I was doing, but I was determined to figure it out.
That's brilliant. Your stock went up. It shot up. That's fantastic. You talk about in your book, you talk about the steps of becoming an entrepreneur. And what were the 3 most important steps for you getting ready to sell your first cupcakes?
Well, I think I really had to make sure that there was an appetite for my product. I like to say, and I say this in the book, it's really important to dream big. Did I have dreams of disrupting the bakery landscape and having a nationwide cupcake business? Yes. But was I going to go after that day one? No. Day one, I was just going to start baking cupcakes out of my little kitchen and see if people like them. So testing the market for an appetite for your product is really, really important, because entrepreneurship is ultimately about taking a calculated risk. It's not about throwing all caution to the wind. And I was about to bet all of my life savings, my reputation and pride, and a lot of hours, blood, sweat, and tears on this idea. I wanted to make sure as much as I could that it wasn't for naught. And then, I touched on this before, but I had to come to terms with just not caring what other people thought, right? Being open to their advice, but ultimately betting on myself and listening to my gut and my instinct as to what was right. So I think those were probably the 2 most important things.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then, we haven't touched on the modern dot yet, but I know you write about it in the book. And that is a really interesting way of well, I'm going to let you talk about it. Really get into the business. It is your signature, but it did so much more. Why don't you talk a little bit about the modern dot?
I love that you brought that up, because in reinventing the cupcake, I also had to, of course, reinvent the sprinkle. And I didn't want to lean into this old sort of tried and true nostalgic grandma's kitchen, kitschy or retro aesthetic. These cupcakes were all grown up. And so I came up with a new design, which was this very graphic and modern dot. And one of the things that really gave me pause in starting sprinkles was that there really was no defensible moat to my business, right? If we opened and we were successful, which we ended up being, what was going to keep people from coming and just ripping off our idea? Not much. Anyone in the world can make a cupcake, and there's not much that you can defend. But coming from the world of technology, I understood the value of intellectual property. And so early on, once our cupcakes became sort of synonymous with that design, I applied for trademark protection and was granted it. So when we did end up sort of exploding onto the scene and the cupcake market exploded with us, and there were so much competition and there was so much imitation, and people would, borrow from our name and borrow from our likeness and do everything they could to be just as close as they could without, taking any, basically imitating us too much. That was the one thing we could defend. That was the one thing we could defend. And it wasn't fun, but you have to protect the brand and your intellectual property that you've put so many resources into. And ultimately, we ended up having to send some cease and desist letters, because even if you have the trademark, doesn't mean people aren't going to try. And it wasn't fun. It was expensive. But if someone were to have walked into another bakery that looked like ours and have a terrible experience, that really would have affected the Sprinkles brand. And that adds to market confusion. So it was a really important part of defending our brand and being, a differentiating piece of our brand identity.
No, it's fantastic. And so speaking of, stores, at what point did you begin to roll out and decide we're going to move beyond the Beverly Hills stores?
As I said, I always had a dream or a vision for having this large nationwide business. But first, we were a bit of a disaster at the beginning. So we had to get our operations in check, some procedures in place, and hire some people, for God's sake, before we could do anything. Also, company culture was really important. Charles and we didn't come from the bakery world, which, in the beginning was probably not the best thing, because there were a lot of steep learning curves we had to figure out. But in the end, it kind of ended up being our strength, because we did things differently. We looked at things through fresh eyes, and we really leaned into innovation. And one of the things that we also leaned into was company culture. And company culture was so important to us. So when we did end up scaling and taking our brick and mortar location on the road and taking it to a new city, we were boots on the ground. And it was hard to do. We had to pick up and move to a location. We had to hire a whole new team and train everyone. We were baking everything on site, baking everything from scratch. What we were doing was quite complex. But, it was really important to keeping that company culture and keeping the specialness of the brand. We didn't want that neighborhood bakery feel to be lost as we scaled.
Right. No, and I don't think it was lost, because I remember when Newport Beach opened, there was a line around the block. I'm like, what is this thing called Sprinkles? Yeah, a very popular item. What mistakes, let me just go. What mistakes did you make early in the game? And was there anything that you wished you'd done differently?
I think I could have done a better job of nurturing my support system and my network. There was something in me that I kind of felt like being an entrepreneur, it was me taking on the world. And it really isn't. Being an entrepreneur can be a really lonely road. And sure, I had my amazing husband and emotional support there. But I remember waking up one day after having my first son and looking around and being like, I don't have anyone I can call to even ask where the best mommy and me classes. I had completely neglected, everything except for my business. And I think now I just realize the incredible support that we need that can help lift you up when you build these support systems. I am a member of a couple of women's professional networks. I've really made such an intentional effort to, have a great group of female friends and mommy friends. And it really takes a village, not just to raise a child, but to grow a business.
That's right. It just to have a life. Because the business having a life, right? To fit it all in. That's beautiful. So, in your introduction, there was a little bit about Pizzana. This is your latest venture, right? Mm-hmm. And what did you learn from Sprinkles that you now apply to Pizzana?
Well, Pizzana is my neo-Neapolitan pizza concept. And again, just like Sprinkles, it is about taking a simple food that people love and elevating it into something special. I think what I learned at Sprinkles that I've applied to Pizzana is that you don't have to completely invent the wheel, right? It is all about taking something that people already love and putting a fresh spin on it. Did that at Sprinkles. I'm doing that again at Pizzana. I think also just the importance of brand. 2008, Charles and I were opening our 5th and biggest Sprinkles store when all of a sudden the market just started falling apart. People were losing their homes. Banks were failing that you would never have imagined would ever be in trouble. And I remember looking at him and saying, we're dead. Like, we are selling really expensive cupcakes. If there's one thing that's going to be cut from people's budgets, it's us. It's been a fun ride, but like it's over. And what I realized was our brand was, our customers had such a connection with it, such an emotional resonance with it, that they made room for it in their budgets. It was that special treat, that luxury that made them feel better. It was their escape. It was their happy place. It was their joyful pleasure. And I think that really speaks to the power of brand. And that's, of course, kind of coming around again. We're not sure what's happening in this upcoming economy, and I'm selling upscale pizza. And I think I've just realized how important it is to build a brand that people feel connected to.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And pizza is love. Cupcakes.
It is.
That's a perfect meal.
That's right. It is the perfect food. It really is. And I love the connectivity of food. That was one of my inspirations in starting Sprinkles, and brought me back into the food world, is just this idea of like how food unifies and brings people together in what can often be a really fractured and divisive world. I love that part of food and working in that world.
Beautiful, beautiful. The food industry seems it can be very innovative, and you're at the forefront of innovation for me. Why is innovation important, and how can others learn to become more innovative?
Innovation is the key to adding value, differentiating yourself and staying ahead of the competition. We were known as innovators when we came up with the first ever cupcakes only bakery, but then the market exploded. There were so many cupcake bakeries across the country. And then all of a sudden we were just one in a crowded pack. We realized we had to lean into innovation yet again. And that's when I came up with the idea for the Cupcake ATM, which I don't know if you guys know about this, but it's a 24-hour contactless cupcake delivery system. And it's really a lot of fun. It just launched in 2012, and we've expanded it. You may see one in an airport near you. We're expanding them like crazy now. So remind me the question again. I just got lost on a tangent.
It was about, no problem.
Oh, innovation. That's right.
Innovation, yeah.
So I think the way that others can be more innovative is really, innovation is just about a mindset. It's about thinking what if, right? And releasing yourself from rules. And Sprinkles came about because I thought, what if the cupcake could be different? What if it could be aspirational? And the Cupcake ATM came about because I thought, I was pregnant with my second son, having a late night pregnancy craving. And I thought, well, what if you could get a cupcake anytime, day or night? So it really is it's about being open to opportunity and not just dismissing something as impossible, but playing with it a little bit and looking at things with open eyes.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. And having fun. I think you were having fun.
Having fun, right? Playing.
Yes.
Don't forget the joy and don't forget the play. That's where your best ideas will happen.
Yes.
And when you're in your flow and you're playing, I mean, that's how the idea of Sprinkles came to be. I was just like playing in my kitchen and having fun and in my flow.
That's gorgeous. That's gorgeous. You just mentioned mindset. I want to touch on that really quick, because at the beginning I opened up by saying, that's what my people now, my entrepreneurs, my fellow entrepreneurs have taught me a lot about mindset. Tell me some of the things that, why is it important to reach any goal? And describe what an entrepreneurial mindset is, and how does it help you to really reach the goal that you want?
Mindset is just foundational to the entrepreneur's journey, and frankly, foundational to going after any goal. And I think at the end of the day, I've thought about this a lot. What is the most important quality that an entrepreneur can have in terms of their mindset? And I really think it is that perseverance and that resilience, because it's not about if the obstacles are going to come your way. It's about how many and, how fast. and how many no's you're going to hear before you get to a yes. I mean, I think about the founder of Canva, who heard no from 100 VCs before she heard her first yes. And that's just, it's such a reminder. I really think that perseverance piece is what sets apart the successful entrepreneurs from those that maybe throw in the towel. And that helped me so much. When I was dismayed, I thought we would never find a location and we were going to run out of money. I called that landlord who told me no back. And that ended up being our Beverly Hills location. When Oprah called, or one of her producers called and said, we need those cupcakes in, Chicago tomorrow morning. And I thought, I have no idea how I'm going to do that. I just said yes. And I hung up and I said, I'll figure it out. And I persevered, fired up the ovens and took a red eye and hand carried 350 cupcakes, my husband and I, ourselves, without a wink of sleep. There's so many moments I can think of where I just had to lean into that and think, this is hard. This is harder than I ever imagined, but I'm going to pick myself up off the floor and keep working and keep moving on.
That's fantastic. That is fantastic. And that's one of the many things I love about entrepreneurs too. It's this constant moving forward. And, it also, that moving forward makes you to be less and less precious. It doesn't mean that you aren't precious, but you have to, it's toggling between the two, right? Can you talk a little bit about, toggling between preciousness and
you can't be afraid to make mistakes. Failure, fail first attempt in learning, right? You have to reframe failure. If you're not failing, you are not pushing yourself hard enough. And in failure is where all the lessons are and all the growth is. You learn so much more than when you succeed. And when you succeed, you just kind of keep on going and you don't reflect on anything. When you've actually fallen flat on your face, that's when you have to sit down and have the hard talk with yourself. But even when you're falling flat on your face, it's like, you have to be proud of yourself for putting yourself out there. I remember being in a yoga class and the yoga instructor said to us, because I'm always wobbling around in the back, I'm the worst. I have the worst balance and it makes me so self-conscious. She said I knew she was talking to me, but she was pretending to talk to the whole class. She said, if you are not wobbling around, you are not stretching enough. You are not pushing yourself hard enough. And I thought that was such a beautiful analogy for life.
No, I love that. And that is the entrepreneurial mindset. Okay, this happened. Now what am I going to learn from it? Right? That's fantastic. So, we're talking to a range of entrepreneurs here, I'm sure. Is there a sweet spot for age, or does every age group have like a possibility of, because I've worked with entrepreneurs of all ages, but, is there a right time to become an entrepreneur in your life? Or do you also see entrepreneurs being kind of all over the spectrum in terms of age and profession?
Never too old. By the way, never too young, apparently, when you look at Silicon Valley, but definitely never too old. I just got the sweetest DM today. My book was released yesterday, and so people are now already reading it. He was 73, and he said he was finding so much inspiration for his small business in the pages of my book. And I always was almost emotional because I just believe so much in always staying curious, always growing, and always learning. And once you stop, it's all about that growth mindset, that beginner's mindset. Once you stop learning and challenging yourself, that's it, right? So I think you're never too old, and it's never a bad time. Some of the biggest tech companies today were started in that Great Recession. When there's a lot of disruption going on in the economy, that's when people really get creative and really get innovative. So it's really more about having the passion and the plan and just being, having that mindset, knowing that you're going to work as hard as you can to make your dream a reality.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Wow. Well, I'm looking forward to sweet success.
Thank you,
Barbara. You're in the nationwide and in Canada?
It sure is. Also in Canada, at Hudson's independent bookstore. I think they're going to be, enter for a chance to win a copy. So lots of ways to get your hands on sweet success. Yeah. And, my mission in writing the book really was to demystify entrepreneurship. We see a lot of entrepreneur is glamorized in the media, and they are, fundraising hundreds of millions of dollars. They are sending rocket ships to the moon, but I built a big business out of something very simple. And there's a spectrum to entrepreneurship, right? And disrupting doesn't necessarily mean in the tech world. I disrupted from a simple cupcake. So I want people to feel like it's accessible to them. And that's why I wrote the book. And that's why I wrote the book the way I did. So I hope that people will find value in it.
Oh, well, it's a great read, and I don't want to hog any more time because this has been so fun. I've enjoyed every minute, but let's open it up to some audience questions. Shall we do that?
Let's do it.
All right.
Hey, I'm back on. I also want to tell everyone that I know Candace is probably like, who is this person gushing about this book in the green room? But I finished it yesterday, and I would recommend it for anyone who's either a first-time business owner or is like in the middle of a business. And I'm not an entrepreneur, and I thought it was a page turner. I just wanted it was fun to see the behind the scenes of Sprinkles. And if that brand and how that empire started, it really was like a great story too. So really, really highly recommend. So
Thank
I'm going to wait
you.
for a few more questions to come in, but I wanted to know, I know you spent a little bit of time, and this is something that's near and dear to your heart, is women in entrepreneurship. And what I especially loved in the book is how you talk to other women entrepreneurs in the world. So what tips would you give for a female to break into the male dominated entrepreneurship space?
Well, I think you have to believe in yourself first and foremost. A lot of women suffer more than our male counterparts from imposter syndrome. And I think, it starts with that confidence piece. So for people out there who are doubting whether they can do it or not, I really encourage you to look back at all the challenges you've already overcome. We all have had, obstacles thrown our way and survived. And if you have a hard time thinking of, times that you've been successful, ask a friend, because they'll remember. And if you have a hard time remembering, start writing those small wins down. Before you know it, you will have a folder, a notebook full of your wins, and realize how just resilient you actually are. And I think the other thing is that we are more powerful together. I've built this incredible network of female founder friendships, and entrepreneurship can be a lonely road. So it is so important. It's amazing to be able to just send a text or pick up the phone and have someone on the other line who just gets it, right? Who just gets it. And we all show up for each other. So we're in this moment that wasn't always the case when I was in the career world, of collaboration over competition. And we realize that we are so much stronger together. I know that I am wanting to shine a light on other female founders. Certainly all of the people in my network do the same. I feel that energy, even just in this book launch, like the women that are coming out of the woodwork, who have already been in my life, but who are also coming out of the woodwork to support me and cheer me on and amplify. It's just so powerful. And I think it starts by you giving back to others, right? So by showing up and asking, how can I help? That starts the wheels turning. And all of a sudden you will be surrounded by women who feel the same way. They want to lift you up.
Absolutely. All right, we are getting some questions in. So I guess we'll start at the beginning. I think someone wants to know how you determined what the best chocolate and the best vanilla was for your cupcake, and how many different kinds did you try?
That's a very good question. I have very vivid memories of my husband and I sitting around the dining room table with my, 12 batches of vanilla cupcakes. And we would sit with our little notepads, taking notes like we were master wine sommeliers. And then I would take those notes and head back into the kitchen and tweak and bring back the next 12 batches of vanilla cupcakes. And I did that endlessly until I got it right. In terms of determining the best vanilla, of course, this is subjective, but it was to my taste. I think sometimes the most authentic way to develop something and create something is if you are customer number one. So I knew my favorite chocolate happened to be a Belgian chocolate by the name of Calabo, and then this incredible vanilla extract, which was Nielsen Massey, which is actually kind of widely known for being one of the best, if not the best.
All right, someone, let's see. I want to talk more about cupcakes, and then we'll move on to some of the other questions. What is your favorite flavor of cupcake and ice cream?
Oh, that's an easy one. And I always feel like I'm disappointing people when I say this because it's kind of boring, but I'm just such a chocoholic. I love it. And I feel like I'm such an advocate of simple pleasures. And so when something is simple, but done well, done flawlessly, I think that is the pinnacle for me. So a really moist, rich, dark chocolate cupcake or cake, like that's it. I'm done.
Could you talk briefly about the red velvet cupcake story? Because I thought that was, we're getting, I also don't like red velvet. And yeah, you talk.
So you'll notice that there's a big, fat, juicy red velvet cupcake on the cover of my book. And that's no accident. The red velvet, we really became synonymous with. It is our best-selling cupcake. It doesn't matter what city we open in. For some reason, people just are drawn to this cupcake. I never liked it. I always thought red velvet was kind of forgettable. It really was just bland flavor. I mean, it was just a bland cake with like a dash of cocoa and a bunch of food coloring. What was the point of that? So right before we opened Sprinkles, I had my menu set, or so I thought. And my husband, being from Oklahoma City, said, well, what about the red velvet? And I said, what do you mean, what about the red velvet? I don't like red velvet. He said, oh, no. We got to have a red velvet. Everybody back home they're going to demand it. They're going to give me a hard time if we don't have red velvet. And I was like, oh, fine. But if we're going to develop a red velvet cupcake, we're going to do it my way. So I really amped up the chocolate. I developed this beautiful, tangy, rich cream cheese frosting and just really balanced the whole thing and brought out the flavor. And it really is a delicious red velvet cupcake, I have to say. But what was so funny when we first opened in Beverly Hills is it's not really Californians didn't know what cupcake was. Some did, but most didn't. And so they would come in and say, can I have that red carpet cupcake? Of course, in LA, they're asking for the red carpet cupcake. And I said, well, I know what you mean. And yes, that's coming right up. But then all of a sudden it was everywhere. And yeah, I'm very grateful to my Oklahoma City husband for demanding that we had red velvet on the menu.
Well, that's a red velvet cupcake that I would definitely eat. That sounds
Thank you.
All right. Someone wants to know what your favorite part about being a judge on Cupcake Wars was, and if you ever get tired of eating cupcakes.
Well, yes, on the set of Cupcake Wars, where I had to taste sometimes 17 cupcakes a day, I would say back in those days, I would get a little sick of tasting cupcakes. But let's remember, I come to this honestly. I love cupcakes and I have a great big sweet tooth. So even long into the Sprinkles journey, I was eating cupcakes with gusto to the point where my friends would say, aren't you sick of those yet? And I wasn't. So, but yes, Cupcake Wars, particularly when they throw those challenge ingredients at us and they were a little bit more fear factor than they were Top Chef. I mean, I remember one cupcake had fried crickets in it, and that was not a fun day for me.
Oh, that's amazing. Someone said, I know you mentioned that the mention in Daily Candy helped generate an interest in opening day, but how else did you gain exposure for your company when your budget was so limited? How did you distinguish Sprinkles from competitors during your initial efforts?
Mm-hmm. So initially, we were differentiated because we were doing something very different. And I think there's so much to dig into there because we didn't have a budget for marketing. And we had to rely on organic marketing because we had no money to put towards marketing. And that came about because we were doing something different. We gave people something to talk about. And I stood behind that counter every day and shared my origin story. So people were coming in, they were noticing there was something different going on. They were tasting an exceptional product, and then they were hearing my personal story. Well, guess what? They couldn't wait to get out the door and tell 2 friends, sometimes, a whole group of friends, and bring cupcakes and spread them around. And there's something also very innately viral about the fact that we made cupcakes giftable. We actually developed this beautiful gift box in the early days that was reminiscent of what you might deliver a dozen long-stemmed roses in. And that was by design. We really wanted to put in people's minds the idea that this was a special gift. And so soon enough, we had the who's who of Los Angeles sending our gift boxes around. Well, there's nothing better than that because they're paying to do your marketing for you. And so really for so long, it was so fortunate because again, we had no budget for marketing. People were doing this word of mouth marketing for us. And then of course I was accused for being strategic with the line out the door and the scarcity and all of that, FOMO fueling demand, but that was a happy accident.
Alex wants to know how you decided on the $3 price and what your thought process was when adjusting the price. I thought you did spend some time in the book on that, and it was very interesting.
I think, and this is sometimes a female thing too, and not to overgeneralize, but I hear from a lot of women, they have a hard time charging what they should be charging. And what I say to them is just to lean into the value that you are providing people. I was actually buoyed by the fact that Howard Schultz had done this for coffee, right? People every day were standing in line to spend $3.50 on a coffee, something that they used to either brew at home or get at the gas station. And there was this sort of idea that people would pay for quality. But I had to do the education because when they initially came in, sure, they saw a cupcake, but what was so different about it? Well, I stood behind that counter and educated people until I was blue in the face on the ingredients, on the fact that we were making everything from scratch, baking fresh throughout the day, and all the things that we were doing differently. And I stood in my confidence of the quality of my product and the value that I was offering. And I never, dismissed the idea that this wasn't expensive, but I did say this has value, right? And at the end of the day, not everyone is going to be your customer. Hard for me. I'm a people pleaser because I work in hospitality and that's my job, right? To make people happy. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to be something for everyone, you're really nothing at all. You have to know your customer. So most people would be convinced after I told them how special the cupcake they were about to eat was, but not everyone was. And for those people, I would say, just buy one and taste it. And you be the judge. And most of those people were convinced. But again, you can't please everyone, but do stand in your knowing of the value that you're offering.
Absolutely. I kind of like this question. It's interesting. What do you think the cupcake flavor of the future is?
That's interesting. Oh, wow. I've seen a lot of flavors out there. Maybe just moving more in a savory direction. For a long time, it was salted caramel, but I think even, Americans have historically had really like things really sweet, but I think that's starting to change a little bit. They like things that are a little more balanced and even more savory. So I know that that's not a specific flavor. I could probably, if you gave me a moment, think about it, but I would say a general trend would be towards more savory.
Not crickets, though.
Not crickets. I don't want that to ever be a trend.
All right, the last 2 questions, and these are great ones to end on. So we have what would be the best advice to give someone who desires to start a business? And we have a fellow entrepreneur getting ready to open my first bakery. What would your advice or top thing to remember that was your saving grace be?
You have to understand what makes you different. It's a noisy market out there. Make sure you've got your differentiation down and your story down. Hone that elevator pitch. I remember getting a box of brownies. They were delicious brownies. They were wonderful brownies, but it was sort of like a, so what, right? What was I going to talk about? What was I going to say about these brownies? What was sort of the hook? What was different? There wasn't even an origin story in the box. I wanted to know who made them. Why did they make them? So just lean into what got you here, you know, what your purpose, your mission, your why, and what about your product makes you different. And make it easy for people to tell other people about your product.
Well, that's a wonderful piece of advice to end on. Candace, I'm so grateful that you came to share your wisdom and expertise and just your enthusiasm and passion with our community. Read the book. It's great. I highly recommend it. As I said, Barbara, lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for joining us as well. And good night, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Have a great evening.